Howdy friends and welcome back. In the last video I explained how to use SQL Stored Procedures and gave an analogy with object-oriented programming. In case you missed it, check out the video on top here or in my SQL playlist. Now, regarding the stored procedures, what if we want to automate them? What do we do? A short answer is we use SQL triggers. It is something I personally used as a Python engineer when leading a database migration, and it is likely you will find it also useful in your job as well. Today, my goal is to equip you with this knowledge in a simple, hands-on, step-by-step tutorial. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. What are triggers in PostgreSQL? A PostgreSQL trigger is a user-defined function associated with a table, and the best part, it is automatically invoked whenever an event associated with the same table occurs. In this case, event can be anything from the insert, truncate, delete or update. Note that there are some differences between the PostgreSQL triggers and SQL standard triggers, and in my humble opinion, the main difference between the two is that SQL standard allows you to use any SQL commands as trigger actions, while the PostgreSQL requires you to define the user-defined function. I am working with PostgreSQL dialect, so I will show you how to define our user-defined function, but these principles apply to other dialects as well. So, why triggers and how to create one? Let's address the elephant in the room. Very briefly, a couple of examples. Triggers can help us to ensure data integrity, validate data before inserted or updated, as well as to keep log of records. But enough theory, let's jump into my pgAdmin 4 user interface and start our tutorial. By the way, if you have any issue with the connection to the database in pgAdmin 4, check out this video, you might find it useful. Now, to create a trigger in SQL, you need to follow a two-step process. Firstly, define a trigger function using the create function syntax. As I explained earlier, function is basically a stored procedure that returns value, but I will show in a moment how trigger function is slightly different. And second, bind this trigger function to a table using the create trigger syntax. So a trigger function is similar to a regular user-defined function, but with two main differences. It does not take any arguments, as you can see an example, empty parentheses without any arguments. And second, it has to return the value with the type trigger. And as an example here, we use standard PLPG procedural language, PostgreSQL language. We have this statement enclosing the body. You can either use simply empty double dollar sign here or use a body. Either way, it should work just fine. Begin and end, and here is your inner trigger logic. And just a note to self to explain the trigger data and its local variables. Yes, it is a really important one as well. As you can see, the trigger function does not have any parameters passed directly. So there are no variables or arguments, right? Which is actually not true, because first of all, any trigger logic without any variables or parameters would be quite boring, right? Secondly, there is a special database structure called trigger data that contains a set of local variables which are passed to the trigger function. So the function knows about its database environment. This makes trigger functions really powerful SQL beasts. For example, old and new local variables represent the state of the table row before the event. For example, we will use it, you will see in a minute, in the following manner. For example, old dot column name, whatever logic is there, equal more or less or not equal to new, the same column name, or any specific value. Then if you surround it with the if-else statement, then you have your trigger logic. That's the basic principles of using this. I will explain it in more detail just in a minute. Before that, I want to tell more about this special tg underscore variable. As we are working in PostgreSQL, it provides additional set of local variables preceded by this tg underscore, which stands for trigger. For example, here is tg when and tg table name. We might not use all of it in this short video, but I want to give you a flavor of what it is used for. For example, you can use this local variables tg when to determine whether the trigger fired before or after the event. Additionally, you can utilize tg table name to access the name of the table on which the trigger is being executed, which is quite powerful in my opinion. But we are moving to the second part, syntax on how to create trigger. If you remember, once again, at first we defined trigger function. We already defined it, and then we bind this trigger function to a table using creator statement. So the create trigger statement is the following. At first, you provide the trigger name after the trigger keyword. Create trigger, a trigger name as an example. Then you indicate the timing that causes the trigger to fire, either before or after, which event, right? Specify the event that invokes trigger. As I explained, insert, delete, update, or truncate. An example would be before delete or after update, etc. Then you need to specify the table name associated with the trigger by using the statement on which table. In our case, it will be invoices, so it will be on invoices. Then type the trigger level. So this one is interesting. A short note about these trigger levels. Suppose a table has 100 rows and 2 triggers that will be fired when delete event occurs. If the delete statement deletes all 100 rows, the row level trigger will fire 100 times, once for each deleted row. But on the other hand, a statement trigger will be fired only once, regardless of how many rows were deleted. Finally, execute this trigger function that we defined here. Now that's all I wanted to share about the overview of PostgreSQL triggers. In the next video, we will continue from here, and I will give you a real-life scenario based on our invoices table with a step-by-step guidance. Meanwhile, subscribe for more and have a great one.